On August 5, 2010, at approximately 2:00 in the afternoon, a section of the San José copper gold mine in northern Chile collapsed. The mine was located near the city of Copiap, in the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth. It was an old mine, more than a century old, with a troubled history of accidents and safety violations. On that Thursday afternoon, 33 miners were working deep inside the mountain. They were spread across various levels, some nearly 2,300 feet below the surface. When the collapse happened, it happened fast. A massive slab of rock, later estimated at 700,000 metric tons, broke away from the mountain's interior and crashed down through the main access tunnel. The ramp that connected the deep levels to the surface was instantly sealed. Dust filled the tunnels. The ground shook. Lights flickered and went dark. The miners did not know what had happened. They only knew that something was very wrong. Within minutes, men began moving through the darkness, calling out to each other, trying to find a way up. But there was no way up. The main ramp was gone. They were trapped. The 33 miners made their way through the darkness to a small emergency refuge located about 2,300 feet below the surface. It was a reinforced chamber, roughly 500 square feet, designed to provide temporary shelter during emergencies. It was never meant to sustain 33 men for more than a few days. Inside, they found limited supplies, 2 days' worth of food rations for 10 people, some water, a few medical kits. The air was hot and thick, nearly 90 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity close to 95%. The men were covered in dust and sweat. Some were injured. Most were in shock. Luis Urza, the 54-year-old shift foreman, took charge immediately. He was the ranking supervisor underground. He gathered the men and assessed the situation. The main ramp was gone. The ventilation shaft was too narrow to climb. Secondary passages were either collapsed or flooded. There was no way out. Urza made a decision. They would ration the food. Each man would receive 2 spoonfuls of tuna, half a biscuit, and a small amount of milk every 48 hours. It was almost nothing, but it would keep them alive longer. He told them the truth. No one knew if they would be rescued. They had to prepare to wait. Above ground, the alarm was raised within hours. Mine officials realized the collapse had trapped workers inside. Families gathered at the mine entrance, desperate for information. Rescue teams arrived the same day, but the situation was immediately assessed as catastrophic. The main access ramp was completely blocked. Engineers estimated 700,000 metric tons of rock had sealed the passage. Digging through would take months, if it was even possible. Initial attempts to reach the miners through existing ventilation shafts failed. The shafts were too narrow, too damaged, or led nowhere. The Chilean government mobilized resources quickly. President Sebastián Piñera visited the site personally on August 7th, 2 days after the collapse. He pledged that everything possible would be done. But privately, officials were not optimistic. The depth was extreme. The rock was unstable. Communication with the trapped men was impossible. The families waited in a makeshift camp near the mine entrance. They called it Camp Hope. They lit candles. They prayed. They held photographs of their fathers, husbands, sons, and brothers. No one said it out loud, but many feared the worst. 69 days would pass before this ordeal was over. At this point, no one above ground even knew if the 33 miners were still alive. Underground, the miners organized themselves for survival. Luis Urza maintained order and established a daily routine. Mario Sepulveda, the 40-year-old miner with a forceful personality, became the de facto morale leader. He kept spirits up, told jokes, organized group activities, and intervened when tensions rose. And tensions did rise. The heat was unbearable. The humidity was suffocating. The food was running out. On the second day, some men wanted to eat faster. They argued that rescue was coming, that rationing was unnecessary. Urza held firm. So did Sepulveda. The rations stayed the same. 2 spoonfuls, half a biscuit, a sip of milk. Every 48 hours. The men adapted. They found a water source dripping through the rocks. It was dirty, mixed with mining residue, but it was water. They drank it anyway. They established a latrine area far from the living space. They created designated areas for sleeping, for meetings, for prayer. Mario Gomez, the oldest miner at 63 years old, became a quiet presence of stability. He had spent his entire life in the mines. He had survived accidents before. He told the younger men that patience was everything. They would wait. They would survive. The mine had not killed them yet. Above ground, the rescue effort escalated. Engineers proposed drilling small boreholes down through the rock to locate the miners. It was a desperate approach. The refuge was small. The depth was extreme. Hitting the target was like threading a needle from 2,300 feet away. The first drill was deployed on August 7th. It took days to bore through the hard rock. On August 19th, after 2 weeks of drilling, the first borehole broke through to an open chamber near the refuge. Engineers pulled the drill bit back and lowered a camera and microphone. They saw nothing. They heard nothing. The chamber was empty. They tried again. Another borehole. Another attempt. Days passed. Families waited in Camp Hope, hope fading with each failure. Some government officials began quietly preparing for the possibility that this was a recovery mission, not a rescue. Then, on August 22nd, the 8th borehole reached the refuge area. When engineers pulled the drill bit back, something was different. Attached to the bit was a note, written in red marker on a scrap of paper. It read, Estamos bien en el refugio, los 33. We are fine in the refuge, the 33. All 33 miners were alive. They had survived 17 days underground with almost no food. The world had its first miracle. The discovery that all 33 miners were alive changed everything, but the crisis was far from over. They were still trapped 2,300 feet underground. The borehole was only about 6 inches wide, far too narrow for a human to pass through. Engineers now faced a new challenge: how to get the men out. 3 separate drilling operations were launched simultaneously, each using a different approach. Plan A used a raise borer, a machine that could widen an existing borehole. Plan B used a massive oil drilling rig brought in from outside Chile. Plan C used a custom-built drill designed specifically for this rescue. The goal was to bore a shaft approximately 26 inches wide, just large enough to fit a rescue capsule. Estimated time, 3 to 4 months. In the meantime, the narrow borehole became a lifeline. Engineers lowered a tube called a paloma, Spanish for dove. Through this tube, they sent food, water, medicine, fresh clothes, letters from family, and even small games and entertainment. The miners received their first real meal on August 23rd, hot soup sent down in sealed containers. For the first time in 18 days, they ate something other than tuna and biscuits. But they were still trapped. The drilling continued around the clock. The weeks underground took a toll. Even with food and water now arriving regularly, the psychological strain was immense. The refuge was cramped, hot, and dark. The men lived on top of each other. Privacy was impossible. Tempers flared. Alliances formed and broke. The 33 miners represented a cross-section of Chilean society. Young men and old. Experienced miners and newcomers. Catholics and evangelicals. Some wanted strict discipline. Others wanted more freedom. Mario Sepulveda worked constantly to maintain unity. He organized games, exercises, and group meetings. He assigned tasks so every man had a purpose. He diffused arguments before they became fights. Luis Urza continued to manage logistics, communicating with engineers above through the paloma. Psychologists on the surface sent advice and guidance down the tube. They warned the men to maintain routines, to respect each other's space, to talk about their feelings. Some men wrote letters to their families that were pulled up through the borehole. Some received letters back. They learned that the world was watching. Millions of people across the globe were following their story. They were no longer just trapped miners. They were symbols of endurance. On October 9, 2010, after 65 days of drilling, Plan B broke through to the refuge. The shaft was wide enough for a rescue capsule. Engineers and officials erupted in celebration above ground. But the operation was not over. The shaft walls were unstable. There was risk of further collapse. Engineers reinforced sections of the shaft with steel casing. They tested the capsule repeatedly, lowering it empty, then with weight, then with a single rescuer. The capsule was named Phoenix, Spanish for phoenix, after the mythical bird that rises from the ashes. It was painted in the red, white, and blue of the Chilean flag. It was just 21 inches wide and about 13 feet tall. A man could stand inside, but barely. There was no room to sit, no room to move. The ride up would take approximately 15 minutes, one miner at a time. 33 trips total. The first rescuer descended on October 12, 2010. His name was Manuel Gonzalez, a paramedic and expert in confined space rescue. He rode the Phoenix down into the darkness. When he reached the refuge, he became the 34th person trapped underground. He assessed the miners. He prepared them for the journey. Then, one by one, the extraction began. The first miner to ascend was Florencio Valos, a 31-year-old chosen for his calm demeanor and physical fitness. At 11:11 p.m. on October 12, 2010, he stepped into the Phoenix capsule. The door closed. The cables tightened, and slowly, he began to rise. The journey took approximately 15 minutes. The capsule swayed slightly as it moved through the narrow shaft. Valos stood motionless, hands gripping the harness, eyes fixed forward. When he emerged at the surface, the world watched. His wife and young son ran to embrace him. Officials cheered. Cameras flashed. He had been underground for 69 days. Now he was free. One by one, the miners followed. Each ascent was broadcast live to an estimated audience of over 1 billion people worldwide. Families cried and embraced their loved ones as they emerged from the earth. Mario Sepulveda came up second. When he stepped out of the capsule, he immediately began handing out rocks from underground as souvenirs to the rescue team. He pumped his fists and chanted with the crowd. His energy was irrepressible. The oldest miner, 63-year-old Mario Gomez, emerged weeping and dropped to his knees to pray. Each man had his own moment. Each return was its own miracle. The last miner to ascend was Luis Urza, the 54-year-old shift foreman who had held the group together from the first moment of the collapse. He insisted on being last. A captain goes down with his ship, he said. But in this case, a captain leaves only when everyone else is safe. At 9:55 p.m. on October 13, 2010, Luis Urza stepped out of the Phoenix capsule. The rescue was complete. All 33 miners had survived. The operation had lasted just under 24 hours. President Piera was there to greet him. They embraced. The crowd erupted. Chile erupted. The world celebrated. In the days and weeks that followed, the miners became international celebrities. They were invited to appear on talk shows, at sporting events, at official ceremonies. They received gifts, offers, endorsements. Some handled the attention well. Others did not. Many struggled with the psychological aftermath. The trauma of those 69 days did not simply disappear when they reached the surface. Nightmares, anxiety, depression, broken relationships. Several miners required long-term psychological treatment. The mine itself was permanently closed. Investigations revealed years of safety violations that had been ignored. But on that October night, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was simpler. 33 men went into the earth. 69 days later, 33 men came out. Alive.